So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for logging on and being with us here today. I know these have been very, very difficult times. Before we get started, just briefly for those that don't know us, just to introduce ourselves, I'm Dr. Carolina Pataky, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified sex therapist, and I'm one of the partners here at the Carillon. And Max Riv, my partner and also co-founder of the Love Discovery Institute, which he's a PhD student at Nova University for clinical psychology and also an NLP coach. So both of us here are today in hopefully being able to help you understand a little bit of what's been going on. Even though we had planned for another talk today, we realized that certain issues were pressing. And so it's really important to really address what's been going on, because I know 2020 has been incredibly painful for all of us. So through this,
Yeah.
yeah.
So just kind of want to add, at least
Yeah.
before we get started, was the idea that Carillon Miami is welcoming a lot of individuals to Carillon Conversations, and we're trying to raise awareness also to the hospitality industry, which has been deeply affected by some of the after effects of COVID-19, and we're also basically wanting to raise awareness, as well as perhaps encourage any donations that anybody might be willing to support some of those that have been affected by the crisis. So we have listed a slide, which is Feeding South Florida, and with a website which can help those individuals that are currently in need. So I want to thank all of you for your support.
Yes, thank you. So to get started, so healing through a couple of several major events, which we've all been going through in 2020, starting from COVID-19 to the financial impact, also the loss of jobs, where there's so much unemployment going on, along with the increasing political tension, where that's been creating just so much anger and the split of the nation. And now the death of a very visible death of George Floyd. And this is really has been leaving the future uncertain. There's been so much prolonged uncertainty that we all continue to experience of what this means for us, what it means for our future, what it means for our families, for our children. And so I find that our community is hurting, our society is hurting. And there's been from COVID, where we were dealing with this invisible threat, and that had kind of taken away our sense of safety, if you will, that then creates also worry, anxiety, anger. I had talked in the last conversation about the stages of grief, because there's been so many losses. But then here are some of our brothers and sisters that have been experiencing these losses for the past 400 years. So even when we say things like, if only things went back to the normal or back to more of the same, this in itself ends up being really painful to other ethnic groups, and African Americans. So we want to be able to start understanding some of these concepts of what we're going through.
Yeah, and I think we want to be able to start unwrapping and making sense of what has been going on, right? Because the idea that we've already been under a lot of pressure. We've been feeling, again, some of the after effects of COVID, but now how that's translated into another narrative, right? Which is just as important to a lot of individuals and what they're feeling, and it's also very painful, right? To experience that as an American, as someone that's connected and works with individuals, right? We're feeling a lot of that pain, right? And I'm sure some of you are as well. So to kind of begin making sense of some of this, right? The events are somewhat related, right? And it's been placed one over another, right? Where we have witnessed egregious acts of violence in the past. Perhaps there's been uprising in the past, right? But this one particularly became even more troublesome because not only was it incredibly visible, as we saw and I'll be blunt about it, the direct execution of an unarmed black person directly in front of our eyes, right? But it's also blown up to the level that it's layered over and on top of the COVID crisis, right? Of something that we have already been dealing with, right? The layer, the window of tolerance for a lot of us was already heightened, okay, and we were very sensitive to that. So to provide just a little bit of context, right, into why some of this division and perhaps this perfect storm of events, came around, is that as humans we have a natural sense of wanting to belong, right, and this is one of the reasons that we early on we start taking on the elements of our in groups, what we call in groups versus out groups, right? So it's the familiarity, the safety, the language, the images that we see, right, and that are very familiar to us, and that becomes also of other groups will be, for example, represented as out groups, right? They're a little bit foreign to us, and when we're taking a look at how subtle that could be, when you have perhaps different nations or different countries that may battle, you may have, for example, a particular book or doctrine or scripture or a particular ideology that, even though we look the same, right, there is a part that's still very disconnected and very different just because of perhaps something, a particular belief, right? When we're talking about Americans here or this country, right, we're also having to deal with the fact that we have socioeconomic disparities, we have political differences, we have a huge cultural diverse community, we have gender difference, we have a whole spectrum of of sexual identification. We have freedom for religion, right? Many different religions and many different groups. So a lot of this has adds to the pressure, right? Where as a country we're all having to deal with the added tension and how we're processing. So on one end we do have the events that led to this and the added pressure that the death of George Floyd has, and what even that represented, right? Because a knee to the neck is not just the outrage that we saw, but it also represents centuries, of oppression, centuries of pain, right? Which is something that even becomes more painful because we can see a little bit of that in ourselves. And then the second thing that we're also seeing is the emotional trigger, right? That we're experiencing. Where I know with Carolina, she has experience as a therapist working on perhaps when mom and dad have a division and they separate, right? She provides that bridge, but now we're also feeling that there is no bridge and there's nobody really to go to. So
Yeah. So to add to what Max is saying, where this is very similar to some of what we see in marriages or in couples in the dyadic system, along with the family system in itself, where there's so many divisions because we've grown up in this individualistic society, where we haven't necessarily been taught to have the connections, have the unity, have the tribe, have the connection with each other enough to be able to explore some of each other's beliefs that we may be having. So I find that, for example, I had one of my clients reach out to me the other day, and she was so frustrated, and she was already experiencing so much emotional pain and fear, and being able to approach certain topics with her siblings and her parents, because she already had been feeling like their views are so different from hers. And so she's been feeling so disconnected from them. And so my advice to her was to really step into her discomfort, and to first being able to be aware of where her discomforts lie, and to then be able to have the vulnerability to talk from that place of self-love to each one of her family members, and being able to let them know what she's afraid of, along with speaking her truth, but also in remaining curious, because we're either being defensive or we're being curious. And so it's only when we start being curious, even within our relationships, that we could really start understanding where others are coming from. And so I see it over and over again with families, where there's this idea of, if you watch Fox versus CNN, or if you voted for X instead of Y, that then you're different from me, and I'm just upset with you, or I feel that you don't see me or hear me. But where do we start hearing and seeing others, and being curious about it, as well as seeing and hearing ourselves, remaining curious and questioning our own being and what comes up for us, getting comfortable in our own discomfort. And so I find that when we're not getting comfortable in our own discomfort, there's a disconnect. So how do we start building that bridge? So we do find often, and I see this with couples, where if one individual is already blaming the other, they're on the other end going to find a defensive wall. So in being able to be curious, because you are going to get a defensive wall if you're not remaining curious. And that's where some of the work lies, in understanding that we need to have this curiosity, which is very often, I always say, part of the inner child work. Because when we are 5, 8 years of age, it's very easy to be curious. And this, when we're in that curiosity, we're learning, we're absorbing, we're understanding a lot more than when all of a sudden we're just stuck in fear. So we also want to start questioning, am I coming from a place of love, or am I coming from a place of fear? And that will allow you to also understand if you're disconnecting or if you're connecting. So you could also ask yourself questions like, does this connect me from this person if I ask this, or is it disconnecting me from this person? Another piece is, you don't want to be asking circular questions such as why. Whenever we ask whys, we're remaining in the circular question that doesn't allow us to necessarily take responsibility for going deeper within ourselves, and exploring even the subtleties of what may be blocking us from going deeper.
Yeah, yeah. I like the way you said it's sometimes we need to be thinking about building a bridge, not a wall, right? And I think it's an important element for all of us, to just deal with whatever crisis or whatever type of communication we're normally having. And I think one of the things, as we're learning a lot more about not only the behavior, but also being able to understand ourselves. So and this really applies to to our overall experience, right? As soon as we're born, we start receiving messages. We make early contact with those around us. We start absorbing things. And when it comes to race, for example, or some of the differences that we're also seeing is what's familiar to us, right? What do we start learning at home? How do we begin even in our developmental years or even in our years of exploration, right? We start determining what feels right, what doesn't feel right, and we start developing, a belief system, right? And this is think of it as stages, right? As we kind of progress. So if there's anything that resonates, right, with where somebody might be or where you are yourself, right, this is all part of being able to integrate into a healthier being. So the first being contact, right, the initial exposure, then the questioning, right, the reinforcement of beliefs. The next would be, for example, like, well, this is, I'm fine. Like, I'm good, but this is not my problem, right? So as we progress into that, we may start negotiating, right, to certain things to say, well, this is just the way it is. Nothing will ever change, right? And this type of message, right, is also something that a lot of people, find themselves in, and even though certain aspects have been a part of humanity throughout time, right? There is change at some level, right? It may not be change perhaps to the entire group, but it begins a negotiation process to be able to explore how we can maybe connect and build a bridge instead, right? It's also becoming aware of our biases, becoming more aware, being more conscious, right? Start asking yourself, perhaps, how racist, am I, right? These are honest questions that we should all be asking ourselves, right? Because again, while we're wanting to talk a little bit about what's going on, right? This is all about the questioning of the self, right? How aware am I of my own actions, my own belief, my own behaviors, and the consequences that I may have to take responsibility to, right? As we progress through these stages, right, we also have, how am I contributing to this, right? How close am I getting to the point where I can become, a factor, right? How can I improve? How can I become a voice to perhaps someone that doesn't have it, right? And these are parts of the healthier side of growth, right? And it also parallels a lot of the things that go into like our basic emotions, right? We have like apathy, which is like, I don't care about you, right? We have pity, which is the acknowledgement of the suffering, sympathy, which is I feel you. It touches on your own, on some of the own discomfort. And this is something that we're all witnessing right now as the event, as we were trapped with COVID, as we were angry, as we were already being disconnected, right? This is starting to touch something in all of us, right? Then there's the element of empathy, which is I feel what you're going through, and we vicariously enter into someone else's world, right? And then there's compassion, right, which is being able to feel what they're going through, but as well as the desire to relieve someone's suffering, right? And so that's something that we can also learn and do for ourselves as well in any type of circumstance.
Right. Yeah, and I want to add that also in the midst of everything that we've been experiencing, and it's been a wave of emotions, and between the prolonged uncertainty, also there is hope, right? So there hope comes when we face challenges, when we seek to be saved. And this crisis has been providing us with an opportunity to explore and learn something. With a great amount of emotional pain and discomfort also comes growth. And so we must give ourselves something to look forward, which is a part of hope. Part of hope is also when we must feel that we have control over our fate, and then responsibility for our behaviors. And then thirdly, when we have a community that can find that we find that will support us. So there's so much hope that we strive for. And so while this sickness may spread, it hope is contagious, and we want to make sure that we're allowing ourselves to consciously become aware of what this hope needs to look like, so we could heal ourselves, and we could also heal collectively.
Yeah, I think there's there's an element, right, where we had, going back to what you were initially saying, is that we had an invisible virus, right? And we were all very scared, but we couldn't necessarily see it, right? And now we've potentially given it a face, right? We've given it a a reason, right, to show some of the discomfort that we have been experiencing together. Something that we all need to be paying attention to, right? And these are perhaps some of the healthier aspects of insight, right? Of being able to go within and understanding parts of yourself that help create a healthier bridge. And I know, as you were saying, that within the family, or within the protest, right, or the emotion or the anger that we're having, right, there is an element that we're not going to be able uh, to to shift somebody that may be completely opposite to us, by just telling them what they need to do, right? There needs to be there's an ambivalent force, and there needs to be a slow progression, right, of being able to get 1 inch closer, day to day, day by day, to come to the point where perhaps an intervention, or perhaps a direct conversation could happen, right? But right now, I know that there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of pain out there, and I know that the control of emotions, right, is irrational for a lot of us, because it works off our limbic system, and cognitively we're trying to make sense, right? The prefrontal cortex is attempting to make sense of everything that's going on, but we're also using our very very immature processes to be able to manage some of the anger and some of the things that are happening, right? So I think as we become more aware, and find ways to connect to our emotions more acceptably, right? Because
Mhm.
I know one of the things is accepting our emotions, right? Every emotion that you might be feeling is completely natural and should be acceptable, but it's sometimes in the unhealthy reactions that perhaps we sometimes fail, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, allowing yourself to have this awareness of yourself and getting comfortable in the discomfort, and those uncomfortable emotions that you may sometimes have. That is a part of when we allow ourselves to go into those dark spaces. That's actually where we find our light. So I'd like to take this time now for any Q&A time. So if you have any questions, please go ahead
Yeah.
and make them at this time.
So we have a couple questions here, and feel free to put those in the chat. So this is from Terry. As medical professionals, are you concerned with mental health in adults, children, teens, as a result of everything that we have been going on? Do you foresee adults being more affected versus children or teens? And what more can we do as parents to help our kids emotionally?
Yeah. Um, so as parents, I always tell the parents that I work with that if you're taking care of you, you're taking care of your kids. So often we try to take care of our kids when we're going through something, and so even when we're on a flight, if the plane is going down, they tell you to use the mask first, to then put the mask on your child, right? So we want to make sure that we're also we're also having these conversations with our kids and with our teens, from a healthy place where we're being able to listen to what is coming up for them. I often see that kids will ask certain things that they already have an answer for. Something that the adults I work with do as well. However, you want to be able to tune in and listen to what they're asking for, and be as honest as you possibly can using their language, since that is also a part of where they're determining, can I feel safe, can I trust this person that I'm asking these questions to. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think in general, like what
Mhm.
you're saying about the element of being able to be the more responsible one, also certainly not add to the anxiety. There's a lot of ways right now we're receiving information. Twitter, Facebook, whatever news channel you're on, right? There's a lot of information, right? And there's a narrative and there's an interest, right? As well as something that we all are wanting to understand, to know, right? We're all wanting to keep a certain level of safety. We are wanting to know if it's safe to go outside. How do I feel about all these things, right? It is an election year on top of this, right? So this, further adds to some of the pressure that we're all experiencing, right? And I know, Caroline and I have had, some difficult nights, just in processing the amount of information, and that's been, very supportive to at least have each other. But certainly something that I think individuals, right, should find ways, going back to the level of hope, right, of one of the elements of hope is being able to find someone that you can connect to, right, somebody that you can share, you can talk about what's going on with you, what you're feeling, ways that you can, hold each other and, in a safe container to be able to navigate through this and not add to it, right? It's easy to just watch the news for 8 hours a day, but we want to be careful, right, of how much information we're taking in, because at the end of the day, we've had these events before. Um, we get through, right? So it is something that I think we can all begin to find and understand, because while it's very challenging and very difficult, there is going to be light, once we do that. But during this time, it's a matter of doing some self care. Um, I have another question here from Catherine. During this time, my husband has been getting angry very easily, which makes me sad and tearful. Any tips on handling this change?
Yeah, so I know for men, one of their to go to places that society has allowed them to feel angry, while society hasn't necessarily allowed them to feel other emotions. And so, in creating that space to allow him to feel his anger, that it's okay to feel angry, when it doesn't become as healthy is when we're reactive and we're reacting to it, as opposed to giving ourselves permission to feel angry. All emotions are okay to feel. It's okay for you to feel sad and be in your sadness, as you're creating that space for your husband to be feeling his anger, and his pain, really. So it's giving yourself permission to feel your sadness and giving him permission to feel his anger, saying, you know what, I could see your anger, and it's okay for you to be feeling angry. So just validating his anger, and also validating your own sadness too.
Yeah, and using that energy, right? I think if some of you were part of one of the previous conversations, we briefly, Carolina had spoken about the anxiety, right, and how adaptive it can be, right? So on one end, anxiety allows us to go out and get the toilet paper that we need, right? For emergency, and on the other end, right, it could also be destructive, right? It could keep us up at night. It could be worrisome, right? Um, so one of the things that we can look with a lot of emotions, right? It's not just validating them, right? But how do we use perhaps some of that energy in a constructive manner to be able to um, write something? Okay, one of my escapes has been I probably have written 15 pages just on my own journaling, right? It's constructive. It's allowing me to get my emotions out in a much healthier way. Perhaps it's going to be a chapter in a book, right? These are things that I know are helping me through this, right? But there is going to be a healthier way for you to find something that perhaps takes that energy, right, into a healthy, into a healthier way that can allow for perhaps creativity, perhaps, something that will, there's going to be just the same way, we're having this crisis, right? From crisis comes hope, right? From anger, there could be a lot of things that we could be looking at to say, you know what, yeah, this is potentially something that is affecting all of us. It's painful, it's hurtful, right? It's making us angry. What can I learn from this, right? Can I learn something about myself? Can I learn something about my family? How can I, create change for myself and my family, or even my community? So it does take step by step. We also have another question here. Is there an exercise or tip that you have on how to manage your emotions in order to not become overwhelmed by everything that's happening?
Yeah, so I would recommend taking some time each day for yourself where you could really just have time to check in and to be with whatever emotions that you're finding. So I do always go back to talking about the breathing, because the breathing is, first of all, part of the foundation to allowing ourselves to connect with our emotions. So the breathing is connected to our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. So when we're actually consciously connecting with our breathing, we're consciously being able to connect between these two, where then we allow ourselves to connect with our emotions that we're a little bit more uncomfortable with. So we're able to then navigate into the ones that we are more comfortable with as we learn how to get comfortable in our discomfort. So when I say taking some time each day to sit with yourself, to connect with your emotions, and to check in with yourself, it could be just a moment where you even set up your alarm on your phone for a minute or 2 minutes, because you want to build on this of getting comfortable with yourself, where you sit, you close your eyes, you start breathing through your nose and exhaling from your mouth. And so you want to first just focus on your breathing, as you want to then start tuning into what is my body experiencing right now. And you'll start noticing maybe some area of tightness, noticing some tension somewhere, and just letting go of any judgments about it. You want to continue breathing through those spaces, and then asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? Trying to see if you could name the emotion. That way, research has shown that even when we're able to name our emotions, we're then able to immediately start feeling a sense of release. So you want to allow yourself to start building vocabulary for your emotions. Print up the one of these emotion wheels with the names for it, the feelings. So this way you could even open up your eyes to looking at it and saying, what have I been feeling today? What have I been feeling this week? And just start recognizing what they are without judging what they are, without going into making sense of it. Because a lot of times when we start trying to make sense of it, we also start not validating what we're feeling, and we also start discounting it. As I had talked in the last conversation, where the reasons that we have such difficulty allowing ourselves to feel emotions is, one, because of meta emotions, which is an emotion about an emotion, which may look like, I'm feeling really sad right now, but now I feel guilty about feeling sad because perhaps something worse is happening to somebody I know. So now I'm not giving myself permission to just drop in to my own sadness. Another reason that we often don't allow ourselves to feel our emotions is because society just hasn't taught us that all our emotions are okay. And we learn this at a very young age. So for the earlier question, on relating to kids and teens, and parents allowing themselves to feel, and also making then that space for their kids, where you're able to ask your kids, how are you feeling? And if your child says, I'm feeling sad right now, and saying it's okay for you to feel sad. Let's sit here together and feel sad together. So and then lastly, we have this idea that if we allow ourselves to feel certain feelings that we've been taught are bad feelings or feelings that we shouldn't feel, that then we're going to go down the slippery slope and we're going to lose ourselves. And often some of this relates to even feeling depression, because when we've been repressing emotions over time and we've been stuffing them and shoving them in different places, then that's when we become really heavy. Um, and so we haven't been allowing ourselves to actually feel emotions that are uncomfortable so we can move through them. So giving yourself permission to just feel whatever it is that you're noticing, it's okay. And so I also want to add that in creating a space each day for that time will be helpful. And even sometimes saying it out loud, where you could even say, if you're noticing that you're feeling angry, saying it out loud 3 to 5 times. I feel angry. I love my anger. I love my anger. So you could allow yourself to integrate some of these emotions too from a loving place. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do have one other question here. How can you support a family member, friend, or colleague who might be having a really hard time dealing with all the uncertainty? So yeah, I mean, kind of the same, the same thing, right? Is being able to understand that we all live, in some spectrum. We're all, fitting somewhere, right? And it's going to be difficult, right, to be able to deal with the reality that somebody else may be holding in their truth, right? This is something that we don't have control over. Some of the behaviors, some of the actions, some of the emotional pains that are affecting a lot of other individuals, right, including ourselves, right. All we can do is just start learning how to manage our own emotions and our own emotional self-care. So with that, I know, you can certainly contact us. We do want to thank everyone for being a part of this, and continued support, and for the Carillon and its feeding effort. But also, if anyone is interested in working with either one of us, we do have individual couples counseling, coaching. Any of these services can also help individuals further improve and understand what they're going through, what they're feeling, right? Whether it's current events or events in the past, right? Events relating to family, relating to relationships. So you could visit us at lovediscovery.org, and we do have the Carillon. However, we're right now just doing teleservices for now. But I do want to thank everybody for being a part of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of the day with peace and connecting with your emotions.
All right. Thank you.